there we go.
Good morning and welcome to COVID-19 update number 3. So with us we have Leanne Pilkington, and our special guests are Lisa Jemmeson and Steve Fisher from Jemmeson and Fisher. We will be answering questions as we go along, so if you would like to type your question into the chat box, I will then pass it on to the panel for them to answer those questions. So it's over to you, Leanne.
Hey everyone, thanks for joining us. Sorry we're off to a little bit of a late start. We had some technical difficulties. I know, what a shock, right? And we have got Lisa Jemmeson and Steve Fisher on the line, but we can't see their beautiful faces. Is that because you guys are in your pajamas or something? What's going on?
Well, it is actually. That's quite correct.
And I'm sure that they're fabulous and very sparkly, Lisa, for you.
Oh, indeed, of course.
Indeed.
I was taught well by someone, Leanne.
Yes, exactly right, exactly right. I do want to just share some exciting news. I just literally got off the phone to Fair Trading a couple of minutes ago, and they've come back to me and said in relation to auctions tomorrow, Fair Trading think that it's actually reasonable for the agent and the auctioneer to be either at the house or at the agent's office. However, they are waiting for approval from the whole of government because they're not the enforcer. So it's actually the police that would come and enforce and stop people actually being together. So they just need to get approval from the police, but that's the Fair Trading position. So that's good news, and they understand the urgency and that we need to get an answer to that today. So anyway, we'll come out to you all as soon as we hear, but that was, yeah, hot off the press. That's pretty exciting, fingers crossed, right? So Lisa, there's a lot of questions going on, obviously, with in relation to landlords and tenants and terminations, and what's the difference between a termination and an eviction, and what happens with our landlord insurance in situations like this. Can you just give us a bit of an overview of where you see things?
Okay, so with the moratorium on evictions, there are only certain circumstances where NCAT are going to allow matters to come before them. And so if we say, look, there are some carve-outs, they relate to domestic violence, if the premises are unsafe, so an application brought by the tenant, or an application brought by the landlord or agent in circumstances where the tenant's damaging the property. One carve-out that isn't there, that we're still suggesting until we're told otherwise, that agents should still be applying for orders for termination and possession, is in relation to properties that have exchanged on unconditional contracts, okay, and they've been sold with vacant possession. But separately,
there's been a lot of questions around that, right? So you are suggesting that you can still go for termination for that.
Well, I'm saying to agents, apply, because what's the worst that's going to happen? They're going to say no.
Totally.
I mean, there's just no provision for it, and because I don't think anyone really turned their mind to every single termination provision within the Act. The emergency legislation really just gave the power for them to make regulations, but the regulation hasn't been made. NCAT have come out and put on their website what types of matters they'll hear, but there's no regulation sitting there at the moment. So at this stage, we're saying to agents, still apply, but make sure you've got all your evidence ready to go, because if NCAT are doing them by telephone or audio or on the papers, that's the type of termination application you'd want done on the papers. So your termination notice, your unconditional exchange contract, when it's due to settle, whether or not the notice to complete has been issued by the purchaser, because that's very relevant, and maybe a letter from the vendor solicitor. That's a matter that could be heard on the papers. Now, separately, then you're going to have the issue with the Sheriff's Office, because the Sheriff's Office are not executing the warrants. So it's going to be a work in progress.
Yeah, it's complicated. I'm so glad I asked. We actually did reach out to NCAT and got a response back yesterday on this, and they basically just said, check the website. So that was useful because, of course, there's nothing on the website about it. And I also forwarded that question both to Fair Trading and directly to the Minister's office, saying that we really need an urgent response, because the implications are massive, right? You could actually be making people homeless. If people have sold their house and they're about to move in, that's just incredible.
Well, the other issue is that if a notice to complete's been issued by the purchaser and the vendor can't complete within the 14 days, the purchaser can terminate the contract. So if we have a situation where there's a falling market, and not to be the Debbie Downer or anything, but if the purchaser, if it's through the vendor not being able to complete, then we're having arguments about commission. So it's just problematic for the industry as a whole. Yeah,
absolutely. It's massive. Interesting. Oh well, we have raised it directly to government, so hopefully we'll get their attention onto that very, very quickly. So a lot of obviously there's lots of issues around rent payments, but not just for residential. I've had a lot of conversations around commercial tenants and the fact they're less willing to share their financials. So how can we actually work out whether they're genuine in the way their business is going at the moment?
Well, look, first of all, agents make sure that they're distinguishing between their commercial and their retail tenants, because when we hear government speaking about it, they keep talking about residential and commercial tenants. But as agents, we know that there's another category. So remember, your retail tenants are heavily regulated, similar to the residential tenants. So again, falling under the auspices of NCAT, and they're going to certainly, you're not going to be able to lock anyone out or terminate or evict anyone that's a retail tenant. Now, commercial leases are often done by solicitors. So we do them ourselves. They fall outside the Retail Leases Act. They've got provision where you can charge interest. We got a question the other day relating to whether or not they could actually lock a commercial tenant out because of rent arrears. And my suggestion was, if you go to your files, you're probably going to find the landlord solicitor has prepared that lease. So there are certain notices that have to be issued under the Conveyancing Act. It really should be, the agent should be sending it back to the landlord solicitor to check the notices have been right and get their advice on it. And I say that as someone who's on the panel for insurers, because why would you take all that risk on and give advice on locking someone out when you can share that burden back to the landlord solicitor and take their view on it? But even so, I'd be very careful about locking anyone out. I think you have to.
I was just going to ask you about that.
Financial.
Is there not a moratorium on evictions for commercial as well?
Well, they're saying commercial, but I would be very wary about locking anyone out, and particularly with commercial, there are certain notices that have to be issued. So the agents may not have turned their mind to it. So I wouldn't be locking anyone out. I'd be asking for financial information. But at the end of the day, if we're unable to enforce or not that you would get orders in a commercial tenant situation because it's done to the Conveyancing Act, but I wouldn't be turning up and locking anyone out, because there's going to be reputational damage because the media, I think, would jump straight on it for the agency.
Yeah, sure. And what about the issue with landlord insurance? There's been a lot of conversations around the fact that you can't claim on the landlord insurance unless you follow the right process. Yet we're being told that process is not going to be effective now. So what do people need to do?
Well, we started the week with saying, look, your termination notices are not going to be actionable. So whether or not you actually issue them, and then one of the insurers come out and said, if the agents are I won't say recommending, but have products on offer in their office that are properly disclosed on their managing agency agreement, including the fee that they receive, And under the guise that they're not giving financial advice, again, on the agency agreement. So if they've signed up to offer a certain product, then when they do the sign up and they vet the agency, there's an actual vetting process. And one of the things is, what's your arrears process? When do you issue termination notices? So they make sure you're doing everything right. So all of a sudden, if agents stop issuing the termination notices, they're acting contrary to the terms where the insurer allows you to commence those policies or take out those policies. So the word from the insurer is still issue the notices. And now what they haven't said, and it's purely because they don't know and they're back to their underwriters, is, and I won't name a product, but for example, there's one that covers you for up to 52 weeks in rent, where you've been denied access to the premises, whether or not, because you haven't been able to recover it, but you followed the processes as normal, but NCAT haven't listed it, for example, whether or not they're going to cover the 52 weeks, and they just don't know. There's, in some policies, there's hardship provisions where the tenant remains in there and you can pull 6 weeks out. So they just don't know at this stage. So I think the best advice, you know, today being Friday, and it may well change, is if they hit the 14 days behind, issue the notice, make the application, and whether or not it's actually processed by NCAT. So if you do the application under the federal diversity jurisdiction, and I'm sorry if we're talking at a high level for salespeople,
you're getting very complicated,
Sorry, but
that's all right.
if there are property managers listening, they'll get this, and, just so that they can map it back and have it clear. If you're doing a federal diversity application, you've got to actually apply an NCAT, and they'll send a letter out saying we can't accept it. So whether or not that letter is going to generate, we just don't know. But that would be the ideal situation where they're applying, and then they're saying because of this legislation or because of these circumstances, we're not going to list your matter.
So the best advice is to follow the processes and procedures that you would normally follow, bearing in mind that we know that NCAT won't act, but we need to just follow those procedures, right? That's right. At this stage, absolutely. That's what we're saying to the industry to do. And as with everything, I liked that you said, you know, we started the week by saying, I mean, a week is a really long time at the moment, and things are changing every single day. So it's really good to just keep up to date with webinars and things like this. I know that lots of people are doing them, so advice is changing every single day. And what? Oh, sorry, go, Nerida.
Oh, sorry, I'm interrupting, Lisa. We do have a question about what's going to happen if we've already got an enforcement order. How are we going to actually make that happen?
Okay, so I know just through a client who's had a tenancy terminated, they applied for the warrant. The warrant issued, they took it down to the sheriff's office, and the sheriff's office said, no, we're not going to execute the warrant. So at this stage, the sheriff's won't book it in for the eviction.
Okay, and so then what?
And so you're saying, well, that's great. And then now what?
Exactly. Now what do we do? Please, somebody tell us. What do we do?
I don't have an answer for that yet. If the sheriff's office are flatly refusing to execute the warrant, it's similar to, and I gave an analogy the other day where the termination notices are pay and stays. And so the sheriff turns up to execute the warrant, and the tenant comes up with a couple of $100 cash when the debt's, you know, a couple of $1,000, gives them a couple of $100, and they won't execute the warrant in those circumstances. So it's problematic. They are vested with the power on those pay and stays not to execute. The warrants expire as well. That's the other thing just be mindful of. That they do have a time period that they have to be served by. Otherwise, they're meant to be returned back to the registry.
Right. Okay. I don't even know where to go next with that.
Well, it's back to it's going to be an issue for the minister because the sheriff, it's a New South Wales jurisdiction, so it's going to have to go back to the minister to get some direction on what he's saying to the sheriffs.
Yeah, okay. I might talk to you offline about that, Lisa, and go directly to the Minister and have that ask that question. Because it is, again, another question that I've been getting asked a lot. We might, is your little friend Steve still there?
He is.
He is?
Sorry, yes, he did.
Hey, how are you, Steve?
I'm well, how are you?
Very good, yeah, awesome, thank you. So one of the questions I've been asked a lot about the 30% downturn that agencies need to be able to justify before they can get the $1,500 a week payment is how do we justify it? How can we justify it? And with the way that we get paid, which is effectively a couple of months after we've done the work, how is all that going to work?
Yeah, since the initial announcement about the 30% drop in turnover, there's been a lot of questions, a lot of confusion, and as government is doing policy on the run because they have no choice, there's certain details that flesh out on the way through. And what we've seen as a result of the initial announcement is some further information, clarification come through from Treasury, who are providing the policy on the 30% reduction and the eligibility for JobKeeper, and and just relying on their advice in their fact sheet and the examples that they use, the idea that a 30% turnover in the March quarter just finished is going, a 30% reduction in turnover for the just finished March quarter is just not going to happen if you compare it to the same quarter last year.
No, so because we're coming off a really bad year, right? The beginning of last year was not great. So if we were 30% below, we'd all be out of business.
That's right. And also, all of these issues have only arisen in the last 4 weeks. So salespeople have had business flowing through, which is still flowing through. So the real downturn, the real reduction in turnover for most agencies will be in the June quarter and the September quarter. So what the Treasury advice is, if you do a forward forecast for the June quarter, and you believe that you will have a 30% reduction in turnover, you are eligible now to register with the ATO to receive the JobKeeper payments.
Wow, that is awesome. Okay, thank you.
Yeah,
that's going to help a lot.
The Treasury advice goes further to say that if you made your best endeavours to recognise a 30% reduction and you don't quite get there, there's still going to be discretion on part of the ATO to allow you to continue to be part of the scheme.
Okay, and that so that downturn, that June quarter downturn, is it compared to the quarter just gone, the March quarter just gone, or June last year?
June last year. So it's got to be at the same period last year. So it's based on whether you're a monthly BAS lodger or a quarterly BAS lodger. If you're on monthlies, you could look at either April, May or June and compare it to the same period last year. Or if you are a quarterly lodger, you could look at June quarter and compare it to last year.
Okay, all right, that's good. That's the most clarity I've had on that for a really long time. So thank you. Now the $1,500 payment to business owners that then gets paid to the salespeople or whoever, any of the team members that are eligible for it, they've got to pay tax on that, right?
Yeah, the $1,500 is a taxable payment. So if an employee was in a position where they were no longer working but were receiving the $1,500 subsidy, JobKeeper subsidy, then that would be just a pass-through arrangement from the government through to the employer, through to the employee, with the employer going about doing their normal withholding, which on a $1,500 fortnightly payment is around $200.
Okay. Okay, I've also been asked by a couple of salespeople if because that's around about, that amount is around about what salespeople get as their base salary, right? I know it's not quite, but it's fairly close. And so what they're saying to me, well, Leanne, if that if the business is getting paid that, what happens to my debit?
Yeah,
are you able to respond to that?
Yeah, we don't have the that level of detail, of course, at this stage. But everything that the government, every decision and policy that the government has announced, has been on the basis that if an employer should not be placed in an advantageous position as a result of the JobKeeper subsidies. So, in other words, if the $1,500 is a flow through straight to the employee, and the employer has received the money from the government, then the employer has suffered no financial detriment at all. So their debit, the debit that would be applied to the employee, would only be any amount that the employer has paid in excess of the $1,500, which is that top up.
Yeah, okay. All right, cool. That makes sense. Sorry, excuse my husband walking past the webcam. So what else is going on in relation to what are you hearing about people accessing the $250,000 loans and those sorts of things? How are things going in that respect?
Yeah, some of the financial institutions have been really quite positive, quite proactive, and each financial institution has their own criteria as to whether or not somebody, a business, will be able to access those $250,000 loans. But what they are saying is that the criteria is considerably relaxed because the government is being guarantor to 50% of the value of those loans. Yeah,
okay. So just jump on I'm sure all of the financial institutions have got applications that can be made on the web for those sorts of things. So if you haven't done it already, just jump on.
Yeah, and what I've been hearing over the last week is that a lot of agencies have spoken to their business banker about obtaining the loans, because many agencies at this point are saying that I don't know if I'm going to need to access that 250K, but it'd be great to have it there because it's principal and interest free for 6 months.
Yeah.
Well, sorry, when I say interest free, I mean deferred for 6 months.
Right, interest deferred for 6 months. That's kind of them, isn't it?
So the idea there is that it's a $250,000 buffer for your cash flow should you need it, with your intention to hand it back at the end of the 6 months and say I didn't need it, and as a result of handing it back, there would be the interest that you would have to pay.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
What other advice have you got for business owners? Is there other things they should be looking at accessing?
Yeah, the important one is the one that's happening right now, which is the March BAS.
Okay.
You need to be lodging your March BAS in order to qualify for the $50,000 credit on your BAS account. So
up to
if you lodge your BAS,
credit.
Correct. So if you lodge your BAS, whatever pay-as-you-go withholding has occurred for either the quarter or for that month, the ATO will then calculate and apply a credit to your BAS account. Any other outstanding balance, you can ask for a deferral from the ATO. So even if you do owe funds for GST for March or prior, you can still ask for a deferral, and the ATO have indicated that they will not be applying interest to any outstanding balance.
Okay. Oh, well, that's something. Yep. Okay.
And that follows on with another 25K in the June quarter and another 25K BAS credit in September.
Oh, I didn't realise there was a third one. Okay. June and September. Cool.
They originally had it as 50-50, March and June, 50-50, but they split the June one, which is an indication that the government clearly thinks that this is going to go beyond June.
Yeah, right. And thanks for that. That's some great news for everybody. Anyway, we will cope, right? We will cope. There's been some news today about ASIC sending a letter, which the Real Estate Institute of New South Wales certainly did receive, sending a letter to highlight that agents are not able to provide financial advice to tenants, and it's off the back of somebody suggesting that a tenant should access their superannuation to pay their rent. Have you got any clarification you can give us on that?
Well, what I would say to everyone is that, in the PSBA that you can't be giving financial advice. It's on your agency agreement. You mustn't go there. Leave it alone. People can go and seek assistance and find out where they can access money, but you can't be commenting. And also just be careful around the issue with landlord insurance. If you've got a particular policy, you can follow the guidelines that have always been there and the policy wording, but don't be giving advice on the policy as well, because that also could tip into financial advice. So we all want to be helpful and want to try and do the right thing, but remember that we're a very heavily regulated industry, and if we're not qualified in certain areas, then best to send it to the right people. That's what I say even about those commercial leases. Why would you have that issue blow up on your professional indemnity insurance when you can bring a solicitor or another party in and they can advise on it? So just turn your mind to who's best to give the advice on something.
Yeah, and you're absolutely right. People are just trying to be helpful, right? You've got tenants that are
100%.
So desperate. I'm sure whoever the person was that gave that advice was just trying to be helpful and suggesting to the tenant where they could get some other assistance. But we just cannot do it.
Yeah.
So Lisa, what are the other questions that you're getting asked frequently?
The big one that seems to be coming through at the moment is landlords where they're self-funded retirees and they're relying on the rent. And so they're not getting the JobKeeper allowance, so they're not employed. All their income is tied up in rent, and so the properties are being listed for sale, and then the tenants are saying, you're not coming in. And access arrangement. So we have always at the firm taken a very conservative view in relation to gaining access into rental premises. And there is a provision in the Act where you can issue notices and you can technically go in. But as an insurance lawyer that defends agents, I know of numerous situations where agents have been set up where it said that something had been stolen or something had been broken. Remember 15 years ago we had the big one with the Turner painting. Do you remember that one?
No,
it was a dual cover one. Oh, it's fascinating. But essentially, look, the agent got set up, sent the notices out, went in with the keys on a periodical, and then an alarm went off that wasn't approved. The alarm didn't get put back on because the property manager couldn't put it back on. And allegedly there was a break and enter, and the tenant had insured an original Turner painting, worth $1 million. And so, of course, the insurer, tenant's contents insurer, paid out and then went after the agent in negligence for entering the premises and for not putting the alarm on. And the only thing that saved it was that the lawyer at the time, which was Talk Murray, was over in London in the Tate Gallery, and the painting that was paid out on by the insurer was hanging in the Tate Gallery. He made inquiries, and it had always been there. So it was a fake. It was a big setup right from the start. So it was a fake that was insured. So we're very
great story,
very
by the way.
conservative on this. Oh, it's a great case, but this is why when people say, but I can just issue the notices and go in, I always say, no, don't do that. They can, but you could be set up, and from a risk management point of view, we just don't like it. So
what should they do? I mean, because we are getting a lot of calls about the self-funded retirees, about landlords that are they're in hardship themselves and they want to move back into their property, or they want the property to sell. So what does an agent do?
Okay, so there's two provisions. You can, although it's not provided for in the carve-out, I don't want agents to be too scared about that at this stage. If they're members, even perhaps if members have a situation where it's urgent and needs drafting for the tribunal, if it goes to the REI and you flick it on, and we'll run a test one on a couple of them, and we can do that pro bono for the REI. But here are the types of ones that we're thinking about. So no access, where the tenants are not allowing access to see whether or not NCAT will entertain those on the papers and we'll do the paperwork. The other one is where they're the termination on sale grounds with the unconditional contract. That's another one. We need a test one to run through being done on the papers. So separately, if you've got a self-funded retiree and the tenant has stopped paying rent and those retirees can't access some of these payments, but rather would be lumped back to Centrelink, and without overly generalising, but if I gave you a situation where these are 75-year-old owners that don't know how to use computers and a first time in their life got a front down at Centrelink and start filling forms in, we should really be looking to try and assist people as much as they can. Now, there's provision in the Tenancy Act to make an application for landlord hardship, and property managers will know you don't have to issue a termination notice for it. You can go straight to NCAT. That would be another type of matter that we would try and get done on the papers and help agents get the correct evidence to run something like that as well.
Okay, fantastic. All right. Well, if anybody's in that situation, just reach out to me and I'll have the conversation directly with Lisa. Thank you.
Yeah,
that's
we'll
a really
pick a strong
kind
one.
offer. Yeah. Of course,
we'll pick a strong one.
Of course.
Well, look, we're on the panel for real cover. So when things blow up, we generally are brought in then. So it'd be nice to sort of, cut them off.
Totally. Totally. Absolutely. So Nerida, have we got any questions there for Lisa or Steve?
We have a couple of questions about the $1,500 payment. What would happen to a sole trader? So can a sole trader be able to access that $1,500 as the support to the employer?
Yeah, so as far as the government's concerned, they don't care if you're operating as ABC Real Estate Proprietary Limited or as Mr. Sole Trader or Mrs. Sole Trader. Regardless, you still meet the criteria because you're running a business.
Oh, that's good to know.
Good news. Yeah. Anything else?
Basically everything you've covered so far. So one of the other questions probably to Lisa is it okay for agents to actually pass on the links to all of this government information to their tenants? That's not giving advice, is it?
It's probably a good idea. And the Tenants Union in New South Wales, so I check that every day as well. They've got a lot of links up and just trying to assist people because they, like the REI at New South Wales, I imagine, are getting absolutely hammered at the moment.
Yeah, absolutely. Everybody is. So even the links for the superannuation?
Yeah. Read that one.
So there's a statement that's come out from ASIC, which basically says if real estate agents are of the view that they need to give guidance to a tenant regarding their financial affairs, they should consider referring tenants to information available on the ASIC Money Smart website.
Okay, there we go.
And it's got a COVID-19 page.
Thank you. That's great.
Yeah, beautiful. Look at you go. Nothing else, Nerida?
Sorry, I'm just looking at the questions here. One of the questions says, please ask Lisa about rental relief.
Lisa, tell us about rental relief.
Well, we just don't have any details because it's going to come from state parliament. Won't come, I imagine, from federal, and there's just no detail around it yet.
Yeah, so I actually was on. Yeah, I was on a call yesterday with Fair Trading and all of the industry stakeholders from around New South Wales, and basically the premiers are meeting with the National Cabinet today, and each each state needs to handle it differently because of the different frameworks within which each state works, and so they are looking through all of that today. I'd like to say that we're likely to get an answer from National Cabinet today, but I don't know. I'm just not sure how far progressed they are, whether they're ready to say, okay, this is how it's going to run. The good news, though, is that from all the conversations that we had, nobody is talking about not paying rent or rental freezes. Even the tenants union said we are not expecting a rent freeze, and we're not calling for a rent freeze. And I did actually ask the tenants union to go back and share that with their members, but he declined to do that. So yeah, I know, can you imagine? And so that's good. At least everybody seems to be clear that the money needs to be flowing from the government to the tenant agent and to the landlord. But as you say, we've got no detail, and hopefully we'll get that from National Cabinet today or tomorrow, but we'll see.
The only other thing just around that, I imagine if it's going to come from Centrelink, the agents that are registered on CenterPay are going to get a head start.
Yeah, that's a really good point. So,
where you pay the 99 cents and it doesn't go through their Centrelink payment, it goes, the rent assistance goes straight to the agent, and the agent's charged a fee. If they were going to do it through there, I would imagine, if you're already registered for CenterPay, you might be up and running sooner.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I mean, we don't know that that's the case, but there's probably no reason why people can't actually just get on and register today if they're not already. So that's good advice.
Yeah, it wouldn't hurt. I mean, as
absolutely.
we say, it may change, but these types of sessions where, you're getting all these heads together are just thinking about, well, what can we do in preparation? What can we get ready? It may be just another thing they can look at.
Yeah, that's a really good idea.
I have one more question about if you did go into an agreement with your tenant to have a rent reduction, should you actually complete a new residential tenancy agreement, or should you not?
No, you shouldn't. And you have to be careful about agreements to reduce the rent, because whatever the agreement is to reduce the rent, if there is a policy of landlord insurance, they'll only pay out on the new agreed reduced amount and not the full rental amount. Situations where agents have done this before COVID-19 is where properties have gone on the market for sale, and sometimes they get $20 a week less or $50 a week less if they're open homes, for example, and then when they're finished they revert back. But just be careful about reducing the rent as such, and make sure you don't prejudice any policy of insurance.
So how would you handle it? Are you able to give them, 1 week's rent holiday for the first week in April, and then how would you do it not to prejudice the landlord insurance?
Any sort of reduction just means if that's agreed, then the insurer doesn't have to respond at the full amount. But if rent reductions have been agreed, it would just be an annexure to the residential tenancy agreement, and for this period, the rent will be this and shall return to the existing rental increment on this date with this figure.
And
so you're not actually bearing it.
I know everyone's talking about 6 months for this, but do you suggest that people negotiate a whole 6-month period, or would you do it 1 month at a time, just depending on the situation changing?
Well, I think today, Friday, if you haven't done something already, I'd wait and hear what Cabinet come back with. So as Leanne said, they're meeting today, so we're probably Monday, Tuesday, we might have something else that we're dealing with. So I wouldn't be doing anything. I'd be sitting tight probably to Wednesday and just see what flushes out. Yeah,
good advice. And then we can make some decisions after that, because as you say, it's an hour. It's not even a daily proposition at the moment. It's an hourly proposition. I mean, if you had asked me yesterday about the ability for auctioneers to auction in the property or in an office, I would have said, if an auctioneer, according to the health order, if an auctioneer can auction the property from home, then they have got an obligation to do it from home. and yet different advice has come out this morning. So that's it's forever changing. All righty, we've only got a few minutes left. So is there anything else that either you or Steve would like to add? Anything that you think we should be aware of?
Nothing on my end. As I say, I think just sit tight and see what flushes out with payments in relation to rent relief. Just be careful. And anyone that is in those situations, if they're members and they can reach out to the REI, we will work with the REI on doing applications on the papers and using our expertise there to get things through and get some. You don't get precedence at EdCat, obviously, but we can assist and make sure that they're going to be submitted at the highest that they can be and work with them. But otherwise, just stay tuned. The big thing is make sure you're checking in with the REI and your sources regularly, because it does change. You know, it could change this afternoon. We might be out of date very soon, Leanne.
yeah, absolutely. Oh, it's crazy. All right. Well, thank you both so much. Nothing from you, Steve, as a closing.
I suppose the only important thing to do is register with the ATO to be part of the JobKeeper system. You don't necessarily. You may not have made the assessment yet as to whether or not you comply. But if you register your interest, then you'll have opted into the system, and if you do meet the requirements, then you will start receiving the payments as soon as the ATO provides us with their
plan. Oh, there we go. Okay, we're off. That's it. We're done. Oh no. No, we're back.
Yeah, no, we're still. Yeah, my webcam's been closed, but anyway, that's all good. So sorry. Just to finish off, Steve.
Yeah, so go to the ATO website to opt into the JobKeeper system, then do your assessment as to a drop in turnover. Keep in mind that the ATO is going to be assessing the 30% drop in turnover. So, for example, you use the June quarter this year, measuring to the June quarter last year. If the ATO is responsible for measuring your 30% drop, then I would be suggesting that a great starting point would be to go to June 19 BAS and see what you lodged in June 19, because that's what the ATO will be working off, and that's probably going to give you a fairly good indication of the numbers that you're talking about if you're looking at a 30% decrease.
Yeah, that's great advice. All right, thank you guys. I know you've been absolutely smashed, just like we have, so I cannot tell you how much I appreciate your time. Thank you so much, and I'll talk to you both again very soon.
Cool. Okay.
Okay, thanks. Bye-bye.